The envelope was heavy, not just in weight, but in implication, cream-colored, pressed with gold foil edges, and sealed with a wax emblem that screamed wealth and legacy. It smelled faintly of expensive perfume, and old money. The kind that looked down on you for bringing store-bought pie to Thanksgiving. I knew what was inside even before I opened it. An invitation to the annual Crawford family reunion. Location: the Crawford estate. Dress code: garden chic. RSVP by the 1st. I had never RSVP'd before. Not once. It wasn't that I wasn't invited, I was. Every single year, like clockwork, they sent the invitation with a kind of passive-aggressive hope that I wouldn't show. And I always obliged them. Skipping out, staying small, staying away. But this year was different. This year, I had something to show them. They had always seen me as Elise, the odd one out. The daughter of the black sheep, Crawford brother. The girl who never quite fit in with the country club cousins and inherited summer homes. The woman who wore clearance rack dresses to family weddings and once brought homemade pasta salad to a baby shower. They never asked about my life. Not really. To them, I was just still renting. Still single. Still working that little job thing. But they never knew. Never asked. And I never offered. Because I knew how they operated. Appearances meant everything. The stories they told each other about success were crafted over champagne flutes and performed like dinner theater. The louder you were about it, the more real it became. But me? I had always built in silence. I arrived 25 minutes late, just enough to ensure everyone had a glass of rosé in hand. Their tongues loose with confidence. The estate looked the same, the long gravel driveway. The boxwoods trimmed within an inch of their lives. The scent of roses and money in the air. I parked my little hybrid rental 2 streets down. Didn't want to interrupt the symphony of luxury vehicles lining the drive. Audis. Teslas. The occasional vintage Jag. I stepped onto the lawn in a navy blue dress I'd chosen deliberately, simple. Clean. Not screaming for attention. My shoes were practical. Hair pulled back. No designer label in sight. I didn't need it. They were already gathered under massive white tents. Laughing beneath parasols. All teeth and tans. Elise? A voice called out. Syrupy sweet with practiced surprise. It was Aunt Margot. Of course it was. Pearls. Perfect hair. And a smile that never quite reached her eyes. My goodness. We weren't sure you'd come. I smiled. Managed to squeeze it in. She barely waited. Still at that consulting gig? Still at it. I said nothing more. Not yet. Uncle Thomas raised his glass toward me like I was a ghost returning from exile. Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence. We were starting to think you'd joined a commune. I laughed politely. The kind of non-committal chuckle that doesn't invite follow-up. The greetings were quick and shallow. Hugs with no grip. Air kisses missing cheeks. But the looks lingered. Eyes traced my dress. Noted the shoes. Assessed the handbag. Compared me to Harper, Camille, and Julienne, all effortlessly styled in designer sundresses and subtle diamonds. And then, just as I'd expected, it began. We were seated for lunch, long picnic tables draped in linen. Centerpieces of peonies and basil. The staff poured wine, served artisan quiche, and refilled sparkling water with choreographed grace. It was all so perfectly performative. Across from me sat my cousin Camille. The same Camille who once called my thrifted coat, boho, like it was a disease. So Elise, she said, projecting for the whole table. Are you still in that apartment? Or did you finally upgrade? I sipped my water. Still renting. I said calmly. Someone chuckled. At your age? Camille smirked. You really should think about building equity. You know, it's the adult thing. The table nodded. Each of them eager to pile on. I could feel their eyes dart between each other. Silently exchanging smirks. Especially now, added Julienne. The market's impossible if you don't already own. I let the silence hang for a beat. Then too, long enough to shift the mood. You're right, I said finally. It's tough. Especially in neighborhoods like this. A few agreed. Probably proud I'd accepted my fate. That's why, I said. Placing my napkin beside my plate and rising slowly, I decided to go a different route. I turned and gestured across the lawn, past the manicured hedges. Instead of buying a house, I pointed at the beautiful, newly renovated apartment complex in full view of the estate. I bought the building. For a split second, no one reacted. Not a single fork moved. Wine glasses hovered mid-air. Then, like the snap of a branch, the illusion shattered. You mean, that building? Camille asked, blinking rapidly, pointing as if the brick and glass complex across the lawn had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. I nodded. Yes. All 12 units. It's called Willow Crest Residences now. My firm manages the property. Your firm? Repeated Julienne, blinking as if I just told her I was a NASA engineer. Yes. Whitestone Urban, I said, finally giving it a name. We purchased the property 3 years ago. Did a full eco-renovation. Brought in local trades. Updated energy systems. It's LEED certified now. The silence stretched again, this time heavier. You could feel the air bend with confusion, disbelief, and the slow dawning of realization. I had worked so hard for this moment. But now that it was here, I didn't feel victorious. I felt exposed. That's impossible, Harper said finally, with that sharp, clipped tone she'd perfected since prep school. You were still living in that tiny apartment, driving that rusted Toyota. I still have the Toyota, I said, smiling gently. It gets me where I need to go. But you never said anything, she hissed, her voice cracking. I didn't need to, I said. You never asked. She looked stunned, like it hadn't occurred to her that I might have been more than the caricature she'd written me off as. They had all chosen to see only the surface, the quiet cousin in budget dresses, sipping coffee alone at weddings. They'd never once wondered about the chapters of my life they hadn't read. The truth was, after my divorce at 30, I had nothing, no savings worth speaking of, no partner, no direction. What I did have was a folder of ideas scribbled on napkins and a fierce, aching determination to never feel that powerless again. So I started small. I volunteered on the neighborhood zoning board just to understand how property worked. Took online courses in real estate law after work. Shadowed inspectors and soaked up knowledge like my life depended on it, because in a way, it did. I bought my first property, a rundown duplex, using every last dollar from my settlement and a laughably small loan from a community credit union. I lived in one half and rented the other. Fixed toilets myself. Repainted rooms in the middle of the night. I learned everything on the job, because failure wasn't just embarrassing, it was unaffordable. While my cousins were posting pictures from Mykonos, I was up at 4 a.m. drafting renovation budgets. While they laughed over rooftop cocktails, I was filing permits and negotiating with plumbers. They never knew, and I never told them. Wait, Uncle Thomas suddenly chimed in, trying to grasp the conversation like it was slipping through his fingers. You're telling us, we pay you rent? I looked at him calmly. Technically, the property management team you contact works for my firm. So yes, indirectly, I'm your landlord. A strangled laugh escaped from somewhere down the table. Camille looked like she'd just swallowed a lemon whole. This is ridiculous, she muttered. What are you going to do? Raise the rent on us now? Evict the whole family? I shook my head. Why would I do that? You're stable tenants. Minimal issues. Mostly on time with payments. Her voice sharpened. So this was just to humiliate us? No, I said. And this time, my voice was quieter, steadier. This was just truth. You've spent years defining me by what I didn't have. I thought maybe it was time to show you what I've been building. They didn't know how to respond. And for the first time in my life, they didn't interrupt me. Later that evening, when the tables were being cleared and the sun turned the sky into molten gold, Harper found me by the hydrangeas. She didn't look angry anymore. Just lost. Why did you really come? She asked. I looked at her, really looked. Past the polished exterior and curated disdain. Back to the girl I used to share swings with. The girl who cried when our grandmother passed away and let me braid her hair on Christmas Eve. Because I needed to know. I said slowly. That I wasn't afraid of any of you anymore. That I could stand here and not shrink myself for your approval. Her eyes shimmered. You weren't always like this. I had to become this. I said. No one else was going to fight for me. She didn't reply right away. Just nodded. I think we owe you an apology. Maybe, I said, but I didn't come for that either. What, then? For closure, and maybe, to open a new chapter. That night, when I got home to my apartment, yes, still a rental, by choice, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel smug. What I felt was clean. Like I had finally dusted off a version of myself that never belonged to me. They had labeled me lesser for so long. I'd almost started to believe it. But now they saw me. And better yet, I saw myself. Not the invisible cousin, not the quiet failure, but the woman who turned silence into strategy, and rejection into real estate. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The city still hushed in blue shadow. I didn't sleep much, not because I was anxious, but because I felt weightless. For the first time in years, I had said everything I'd held inside. And now, the silence I used to carry like a shield felt lighter. The phone buzzed beside my bed. An unfamiliar number. I ignored it at first. Probably spam. But then came the message. Hey, it's Harper. Do you have time to talk? I stared at the screen. Harper, my cousin, my critic, my rival without the title. I considered ignoring it, just letting that message float unanswered into the void. But I didn't. I sent her a link to a video call. Monday, 10 a.m. Don't be late. She joined 5 minutes early. No makeup, ponytail, a hoodie instead of a blazer. Not the polished, airbrushed version of herself that used to perform at every family event. This was someone else. Someone I hadn't seen since we were teenagers catching fireflies in Grandma's backyard. I owe you an apology, she said before I could speak. I wasn't expecting one, I replied. Well, you deserve it anyway. We sat in silence, the kind that's not uncomfortable, just tentative. Then she said something that caught me off guard. Do you remember that Christmas when I got that design internship in LA? Yeah, Grandma wouldn't stop talking about it. Well, that same year, I found your sketchbook. I paused. My breath hitched a little. I saw your designs, she continued. They were better than mine. Honestly, cleaner, more human, but you never submitted them. Why? I looked down, took a sip of my coffee. Because by then, I said slowly, everyone had already decided who I was. And I didn't have the energy to prove them wrong anymore. Harper was quiet for a long time. Then she said, well, you're doing it now. Loud and clear. Later that week, something unexpected began to happen. I started getting texts. Some awkward, some cautious, but they came. A thumbs up emoji from Uncle Thomas. A forwarded article about urban zoning from Cousin Brian, who hadn't spoken to me in years. Even a voicemail from my mom. Voice softer than I remembered. Hi sweetheart, your dad and I were wondering if you'd like to come by for dinner. Just us. Nothing fancy. It wasn't exactly a grand gesture. But it was the first invitation I'd received from them in years that didn't come embossed or sugar-coated. I said yes. That Sunday, I walked up the same steps I used to sulk on as a teenager. The house looked the same, white columns, creaky shutters, the faint smell of roses and old coffee. But something was different. They didn't ask about my shoes, or my car, or whether I'd found anyone yet. They asked real questions, polite, hesitant questions, like someone reaching for a light in a dark room. What's it like managing all those properties? Are the tenants nice? Do you get to design anything yourself? And for once, I answered, not defensively, not to prove a point, just honestly. Then, in the middle of dinner, my mother leaned forward and said, why didn't you tell us you were struggling all those years? I set my fork down. Because I wasn't struggling, I said. I was building, quietly, because I knew if I made even one mistake, the whispers would drown me. She flinched, just slightly, but it was there. I thought if I showed you what I was working on too early, I added, you'd only see what I hadn't done yet, not what I was trying to do. She nodded slowly. Maybe we judged your silence instead of your intention. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it landed harder than any apology could. The next day, I got a call from my property manager. "Hey, Elise, we've got a situation with Unit 3. My stomach tightened. Aunt Margot," she continued, "her rent bounced. Third time in 6 months. She's behind." I paused. "Has she said anything?" "She's embarrassed. Been avoiding us." I closed my eyes. The woman who once told me I was wasting my life was now hoping I wouldn't evict her. "I'll handle it," I said quietly. That night, I went back to the beginning. I pulled out the old shoebox. The one I kept under my bed. Inside were scraps of my past. Blueprints with coffee stains. Newspaper articles from when I fought for low-income zoning on the city council. A picture of me in a hard hat, grinning like an idiot beside the duplex I flipped with borrowed tools and sheer will. I thought success would feel like applause. But it didn't. It felt like stillness, like peace, like being home in your own skin. And then came the second message from Harper. "Can I learn? For real. No shortcuts. Will you teach me?" I stared at the screen. The girl who once mocked me now wanted to understand what I built. I wrote back one word. Monday. Monday morning arrived with cool air and quiet light pouring into my office. I had cleaned the space the night before. Not because I needed to impress anyone, least of all Harper, but because I wanted her to see where the real work happened. Not behind a fancy desk or under golden lights, but here, among blueprints, notes scribbled in red ink, coffee rings on wood. She arrived on time. No heels, no flashy jewelry, just a plain blazer, flats, and a quiet kind of nervousness I hadn't seen in her since we were kids. "I brought coffee," she said, holding up 2 cups like a peace offering. I smiled. "Thanks. Let's get to work." I didn't start with contracts or market trends. Instead, I handed her a thick stack of tenant feedback reports from our last property acquisition, some glowing, some scathing. "These," I said, "are more important than spreadsheets. Read them, all of them." She blinked. "Seriously? All this?" I nodded. "If you don't know who you're building for, you're not building anything." She sat down, pulled her sleeves up, and began. By the end of the week, something had shifted. Harper didn't just parrot phrases anymore, she asked real questions. What zoning category would this fall under? Why did you prioritize walkability in the layout? Would rent caps actually work here? Or would they drive out investors? She was thinking, really thinking, and it showed. I found her one afternoon, standing in front of the giant city map I had pinned to the wall, the one filled with color-coded pins and notes about future projects. She pointed to a stretch of aging duplexes. "This area, it's close to transit but neglected. Has anyone looked at it for affordable housing?" I raised an eyebrow. "You just did." That night, I sat on my couch, alone, sipping tea in the quiet. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was protecting something fragile. I felt like I was passing something on. The next morning, I got a call from the city planning department. They were hosting a forum on ethical urban growth. The theme? Voices from the margins. Building with integrity. They wanted me to speak. At first, I hesitated. I'd spent so long moving quietly, building without noise. The idea of stepping into a spotlight felt unnatural, like wearing shoes that didn't fit. But Harper pushed me. "You have something to say. And now people want to listen." So I said yes. The event was held in a community hall, not some marble-coated convention center, but a space that smelled of old wood and warm coffee. City officials, planners, students, activists, investors, a mix of people who, like me, wanted to build something better. I spoke for 20 minutes. Not about profits, not about prestige, but about foundations. About how I started with a duplex and an empty bank account. About walking construction sites with steel-toed boots. About learning that kindness isn't weakness. And that real power isn't flashy, it's quietly consistent. When I finished, the applause wasn't thunderous, but it was warm, honest, steady. Afterward, a woman from the mayor's office approached me. "We'd like to work with you," she said. "This city needs more builders who care about people, not just margins." I nodded. I'd like that. A week later, I found a folder on my desk. A new project. East Point revitalization. A stretch of struggling homes. Low-income tenants. A school on the verge of shutting down. There was a post-it on the cover from my team. It's yours if you want it. I didn't open it. Not yet. That evening, we held our first tenant appreciation night at Willow Crest. Fairy lights hung from trees. Kids chased each other around garden beds. Someone played music from a Bluetooth speaker. And the smell of roasted vegetables and cinnamon bread drifted through the air. It wasn't fancy. It was real. And somehow, that made it feel sacred. Toward the end of the night, my parents arrived. Not dressed up. No heels. No sport coat. Just them. Soft smiles. Comfortable clothes. And a plate of homemade brownies my mom insisted on bringing. They mingled. Asked about the garden. Talked to tenants. No performance. No pretending. Just presence. And when I stood up on the little platform we'd set up under the lights, I didn't bring a script. I just said, thank you, not just for showing up, but for believing in this place. For letting me grow it with you. I looked out across the lawn. I saw Harper, explaining rent stability policies to a young official like she was born for it. I saw Aunt Margot, yes, even her, laughing beside a neighbor over some story involving raccoons and recycling bins. And I saw my mother, elegant, proud, dancing barefoot with a child from the building across the street. And for the first time ever, I didn't feel like I was proving myself. I just felt like myself.